All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming, and yeah, so it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about some new things that we've been trying, which I refer to it as research-oriented learning. But this is a course that basically I've been doing for the past couple of years on the topic of hardware security. And so when I started back in 2016, this was like a relatively new topic. So the type of research that was being published. So it was and then it was very much sort of like on the research front of things. So then I was back then thinking, okay, how can I basically get the students excited about this so that we could do more research in this area? And of course, you might say, okay, so what is the difference then with this research-oriented learning that you try with hardware security than a normal standard learning? And I would basically say that, okay, if you have basically this standard learning, typically you have many topics that you want students to learn about. So these are broad topics, and that is one of the objectives. And for each of these, some of these topics, you have exercises, and these exercises are designed to solidify knowledge. But if you look at this, right? So this, and during these exercises, you tell the students exactly what they need to do and how they need to do it, and so that basically they have a clear task. And this is also because you have so many topics, you need to basically help them more doing these exercises. But if you think about it, so if this is the state of the art, for many of these topics, you don't really go deep enough for them to be able to do something new or understand basically what is the current state of research. And this is, so where, we want the students to learn about the state of the art. And, you've already heard this twice, right? So the typical format for this is, of course, seminars, right? But so the problem with seminars, again, as just echoing what my colleagues have said, is that we have oftentimes one student talking, and there is usually no interaction. So this is, of course, so not very engaging, and we end up again like in this sort of like picture where the students are really bored. So because they're not really interacting, at least most of them are not. Right. So how do we change that with research-oriented learning? And so here the objective is really learning about the state of the art. And we do this through doing reviews and roundtable discussions. And I tell you a little bit about how we do this. It's very similar to also what Rima told you before. And I basically just explain a little bit some of the differences. And we also tell them the other objective is learning, really telling them how to do research. And this is where they start by reproducing the state of the art and also extending it. This I'm going to now focus on a little bit more. So in this research-oriented learning format. So this is now basically you focus on these two topics, one or two topics that you really care about, and you try to go really deep, right? So here you have maybe less breadth, but more depth. And the exercises here are there to develop the skills. And so you start by, again, very similar to the more, I would say, general purpose learning. You tell the students what they need to do in these first early exercises, but we don't really tell them exactly how they need to do it. We just tell them a little bit so that, they have to figure out the rest of it themselves. Of course, it's a little bit harder, it takes a little bit time, but now since we have fewer topics, this becomes possible. And then we slowly make the exercises a little bit harder so that they gather this skill of being able to figure out the stuff on their own. And then in the second part, we give them the research papers. These are the research papers from our own group. And these are published, so we know all the tricks and all the nitty-gritty details that they need to do. So if they get stuck, we can help them. So we tell them what they need to do, right? So we give them weekly tasks. Okay, this week you need to figure out this part of the paper, and this other week you need to figure out that part. So we tell them what they need to do, but we don't really tell them how they need to do it. So they need to figure this part out by themselves. And by the end of it, they're really and these are the papers that we have published in recent years. So they're really now at the state of the art. I mean, during these last few weeks of the course, then they have to come up with some new ideas, right? on the topic that they've chosen, that they have basically replicated the result. And here it's really up to them. So, and then we let them think about this and come up with some new ideas. And then they have 2 or 3 weeks to actually try out these ideas. And the result of this is, of course, fascinating, because some of the time, not always, but some of the times they come up with ideas that we didn't come up with ourselves, right? And it's not uncommon. So every year, usually every 1 or 2 years, we have like one group that does enough that we think is good enough that if we do a little bit more work on it, then it becomes ready for a research paper. And for example, this year, from the last time that we had the course, now we have some of our students now extending what they did during the course to basically make it into a workshop paper. And yeah, so, and this is indeed this part where they need to do something new. So we start basically etching on the state of the art and really pushing past that, and they start really doing research. And so to just give you, to exemplify this is what we do in hardware security, right? So we have like these 2 common threads on CPU security and DRAM security. And then we have these 2 individual assignments that on each topic that everybody does. This is so that they have this general knowledge also about these 2 topics. And then they team up and try to reproduce these attacks on either the CPU direction or DRAM direction. To provide you a little bit more with the timeline of how this goes. So the first 5 weeks of the course, so they focus on these individual assignments. This is also the time that I give them a few lectures on these topics, so that they build up the core knowledge and skills that they need to have to actually start doing the research in the part of these projects that they have to do to replicate these papers. And this is the core part, the bigger part of the course that takes about 8 weeks. And as part of these 8 weeks, during the last 3 weeks, they have to come up with a new idea and try to actually build it on top of the state of the art. Of course, oftentimes, it's good to do these things and learn basically about the skills, but also for the students to actually understand why these are the state of the art. They need to understand also the literature in a broader sense. And so here, also similar to what Thomas said, we try to mimic what happens like in a conference setting. And what we do is we have the students as the program committee. So we as the teachers, we try to act as the program chairs. And then the idea is that we have pre-selected a number of papers that we think are relevant for this topic, and it would be good for the students to know, so that it will later help them come up also with new ideas. And this runs in parallel with the research, with the core part of the research reproduction. And what we do is that we assign each student three papers, and then they have to write a critical review on these papers. So each student ends up writing 3 of these reviews. And I have this one lecture that I tell them, okay, so how is it how can you write a good review? Because writing it, as it was also mentioned before, is not so easy if you've never done it before. So I basically tell them, you need to look for things like novelty and the things that you need to look out for. I also give them a structure of a review. And again, similarly, they need to come up with a score to say, whether the paper is good enough to be accepted to our conference, because we are a program committee of the conference, right? And then they need to write a short summary, and then they really need to focus on these pros and cons of this paper. And then they have to have a discussion of why they think some things are good and some things are bad about the paper. And I also tell them, oftentimes before this course, if you ask the students, they always think that everything that is written in a research paper, is a word of God, and there can be nothing wrong with it, right? But now after this course, they start really questioning this, and I really try to help, to push them and help them to become a bit more critical. And then the second part of, after the critical reviewing is done, then the second part comes in, and this is the part where we start discussing the reviews in class, to agree on the merits of these papers, or if there are none. So depending on the number of people who take the course, each paper could get between 3 to 5 reviews. So this is also the part that could scale depending on how big the course is. And of course, the part that doesn't scale is us basically reading the reviews and trying to basically give them feedback and giving them grades. Right? This is the part that also is a bit of work. But I feel like this is necessary so that they get a continuous feedback so that they could improve their reviews. Also, so then during this roundtable discussion, basically we are sitting together, and there are like 3 or 5 of them. They're discussing the reviews. They don't always agree, and then my job there is just to sit back and try to listen to the discussions. And in the beginning, so every time we do this, I always question, okay, why are we doing this here? Because it feels like this part doesn't give them much. But every time, of course, by the end of the course, I'm convinced that we should do this again. So in the beginning, like they start talking about topics that are maybe not very important, right? But then you start like basically asking certain questions, and then little by little the discussions start getting better, and they start focusing on these important points that as a scientist you also think are important. So towards the end, in the later weeks of the course, you really see like these sort of discussions that look like as if you're like in the program committee of the conference, and this is really interesting to see. And also during this, sometimes they come up with new ideas for research weeks. And even it has happened once or twice that they come up with ideas that later actually be turned into a master thesis or a semester project. So this is also something that is nice. And then after this, I have these slides at the end of the course that I say, okay, this can be your life after hardware security, right? Because now you know exactly the state of the art, right? So you can just start doing research if you like. So you may be a student one who say that I'm so done with hardware, and security. I want my life to make sense again, because of the practical nature of this. It's also quite some work for them. And then some other students, they said this was just getting interesting, right? And then this also gives us a chance to tell them about possible research topic that they could do after this. So one of the benefits of doing it this way is that by the end of the course, they know they have all the skills that they need to have to immediately jump in and start doing research, right? So here we can then advertise a few of the topics, and then we get a few really interested students that follow up and try to do research on this area, and or do a PhD. So I have a Hall of Fame that I show every year to the students, and this is like running from 2016 to 2020, and I bold them the names of the students that ended up being PhD students in the group. So this is and this Hall of Fame is signifying the people who have won, who have done the best demo, and also similar to Thomas, we had to increase the categories in which we give the awards, because little by little we realized that people are doing much better, for example, in reviews and so on. So we created new categories to also reward the students who try to write good reviews or do the best discussions. And here is the examples of the example of awards from last year. So these are 3D printed CPUs. So, and we gave the awards in 3 categories. So for the one who could basically create the best demo of one of these attacks, and then one for the best review, as I said, and one for a best discussion. Now, also before I finish, I just want to say that there is this reviewing management system that we use called HotCRP. And this is a free license. This has a free license for academic courses. So if you want to, collect reviews and assign reviews, I mean, students can go and say, I like this paper, I don't like to review this paper, and then this system can automatically assign the papers to the students for the review. So if you want to try something like that, I make use of this extensively during the course. And that's my presentation. Thanks.